So, appreciate you guys coming out today. This is Hamilton Evaluations. We're gonna talk to you about well and septics. Today, basically what's a well, what's a septic, positives, negatives, etc. They are by far one of the largest, if not the largest, well,
It's just two of us, that's how large we are.
Just,
Wow, we're
just
pretty
like
large.
they are by far one of the best.
Yes.
In
Located
south of
out
town?
Marion County.
Well, not anymore, we're in
No.
Gaines Township, we're in Gaines Township off of Eastern.
Really?
100.
Oh, hey, I guess I don't know much
So
about that.
we're real close to you.
We're gonna tape this, so with the website, the company website, there's gonna be something on the back end that, for educational reasons and purposes and stuff. So Robert's gonna be in the back, so if you could just not talk or have your cell phones on, that'd be fantastic. This way, we don't have to do this class multiple times. We'll have it all done. That way, if someone has questions on septic, you have the answers. All right, with that being said, take it away.
I'm Joel Hamilton, this is Lori Hamilton. That's all of Hamilton Evaluations. We're in, big is the best I can say. But we do well and septic inspections. We started out in Berry and Eaton County where they had a time of sale ordinance that is no longer there. It was voted out in March. But we established our inspection criteria under their premise. So when they established the regulation, they had criteria and credentials that had to be met to be an evaluator. Now there is no credentials, no expectations, anybody can do it. So to try and find someone with credentials is kind of impossible. We don't even have them anymore because they don't offer them. But we're in 18 counties, so we go all the way up into Kalkaska, we go down to St. Joseph and all over the place. So anywhere that they allow private evaluators, we can go in there, unless they have a registration requirement.
Say a little bit about your experience.
Well, I was a sanitarian. I started out in Ottawa County and I went to Allegan County and then I worked several years in Berry and Eaton County, and I helped establish the regulation that they had in place for about 10 years. I spent almost all those 10 years trying to help get it repealed, and we did. We finally got it repealed because it was a little bit too invasive. Having an inspection is supposed to be more about the disclosure, so everyone knows what they're buying and selling, but when the government got involved with it, they really nitpicked what a failure was. So like a water softener hooked up incorrectly would be a failure. You wouldn't be able to sell your house until it was corrected and approved by the health department. So it really put a lot of extra steps into the process of trying to sell your house. Which when they implemented it, was back when the housing market was not very good. So people would try and sell their house under a short sale, and so they wouldn't lose it to foreclosure, and the process would take so long they'd end up losing foreclosure anyway. So it wasn't very good for the community. The inspection process is pretty important, but the way that they were handling it was not. So now they're like most counties, like Kent County also doesn't have a time of sale ordinance. They do offer the inspections, like most counties do offer the inspections. Sometimes they're cheaper. I think usually they are cheaper, but it might take 3 or 4 weeks to get someone out there, and then maybe another couple of weeks to get a report.
They also have a pumping
about 2
requirement.
months right now in Allegan County.
2 months? Yeah, and that's actually a lot faster than what they were doing them. Which 2 months when you're trying to sell a house is not really that great of a thing to have to say you have to wait for an inspection. And a lot of times those inspections result in unsafe water samples or required repairs, and that adds to the time too. So trying to get the health department to come out and do these inspections after they found problems sometimes adds a lot to the time. We're a lot quicker, because this is all we do. We just do well and septic. Health departments have a lot of other responsibilities. So they're stretched pretty thin, and they have very few people doing those inspections. They also don't do the amount of stuff that we do for an inspection because they don't have the resources to do it. So like digging up septic tanks, we do pretty much all of that. And we'll inspect the septic tank. They'll require a pump card. I know the purchase agreement has changed. That's pretty much requiring pumping now. But that's something that can still be negotiated. So I still use the criteria that Berry and Eaton established, where 1/3 of the total volume, if it's solids, it needs to be pumped, and that's the criteria I use when I do my inspections. And all I do is I check whether it's due or not, and then you guys can negotiate that out however you decide to do it.
So example of what Joel's talking about, I have a listing where it has actually 2 septic systems. They were pumped in May. And then my folks decided to put the house on the market. We got a purchase agreement, and what we did was we countered that part that says they have to be pumped. And we said, septic tanks will only be pumped if required by the well and septic inspector. And then we also, got a copy of the pump cards to go over to that agent that wrote that purchase agreement. Cause it doesn't make any sense to pump tanks again when they were just pumped like a few months ago.
Oh, that was my question. How
Yeah.
much time was it
They were
between?
pumped either in, May or, April or May, so they're not even 6 months old.
Oh, okay.
And the frequency on that varies depending on who you talk to. They'll say 3 to 4 years or 4 to 5 years. And that's only because they don't know what people's usages are. So the idea that you can have someone actually go in there and look at the volume and tell whether you're due, because some people might be due after 6 months. And some people might not be due for 10 or 12 years, depending on how they use their systems. I've seen systems that they said, oh, I've had it 40 years, never pumped it, never had a reason to. And that scares the bejeebers out of me because that's not maintained at all. And then sometimes I'll open it up and it still looks like everything's working fine. And then I gotta tell them, I guess 40 years is your interval, because 40 years worked for them.
The products makes a difference, what you're flushing.
Yeah, what people use in their systems. There's a lot of chemicals you can put in there that can harm the concrete, and there's a lot of things that can plug up a system and cause issues like that.
Are there things you can put in that help it?
No, they do tell you to put, there's a lot of people that'll try and sell you things like Ridex, and those commercials will always show you them digging up the yard. That's one of the products that actually does as advertised, but if they must not really understand how a septic system works. A septic tank, the whole purpose of it is to hold the solids. Now, if you're breaking down the solids, they have to go somewhere, and it's likely that they're going to the final disposal. And the final disposal is mostly designed to take water. So if you're breaking down the solids and you're sending them out to the drain field, it could be shortening the life of the system, and you could be replacing it a lot sooner. So it's strange when you have a septic tank pumper selling a product that will shorten the life of the system, but it also reduces the amount of time that they're gonna be pumping. I don't know why they would sell something that causes them less work, but many of them do.
There is a pumper in Hastings that's selling their product.
Yeah, I don't know why they would wanna do that.
Anything enzyme based shouldn't be used. So there's a lot of cleaning products now that advertise that they're enzyme based. So even things like that shouldn't be used because it will break it down over time.
But if you do, it just means you're gonna have to probably maintain your tank more often.
Do you want?
We passed out an example of one of our inspection reports. It's more complete than they all have to be because we do have a pump card attached. This is actually our house, so we're not like sneaking anybody's in and having them go, why are you showing her? And this report is actually one that's good, but what we do is we describe what's there on the first page for the well or the septic. We write the well and septic reports up separately. So when you write up a well inspection report, all the information on the first page is going to be what it is. And then the checklist on the back is explaining what priority it would have. Like a priority 1 would be a failure, and it would be something that you would probably have to contact the local health department to get repairs. A 2 and a 3 would be everything's probably okay, but it doesn't necessarily meet code. And a priority 4 would be like a new well, everything's up to code and everything's working and things like that. And the same with the septic. The first page is going to be the description of what kind of system is there, the size, and then it's just going to have a little thing that indicates what priority it is, and the next page explains what that priority is. If there's anything outside of a standard check, there'll be comments in the notes saying specifically why it's at that priority. And then the water results from the laboratory are attached, and then so are the site plan. And I do a site plan at every inspection, well or septic. So that's one of the things you'll get, and it'll show all the isolation distances. Most times when a lender's requiring an inspection, they want to know what kind of system, is it sized appropriately, is the condition decent. There's not any kind of guarantee you can give on a system, even if everything's perfect. There's no guarantee that it's going to last forever or how long it's going to last. It's more dependent on the people that were there versus the people that are going to be there. So the water usages could change. So you could have a system that actually looks really bad in a report that's struggling and straining to survive, but they could have had 6 people living there, and then there's gonna be a retired person living there by himself. You know, that's gonna probably recover the system. And if you go the opposite way around, you could have a system that's in great shape where there's only 1 person, you could have a lot of people coming in, and they could actually put undue stress or burden. So even though you have a report that might look good, you have to take into consideration the people that were there and the people that are coming in. Because that's gonna have different effects on how a system is working. And that's not gonna be in the report, that's something you're just gonna have to be kind of aware of. And if you ever have questions, you can always call us. We have people calling us when they have inspections in other towns by other evaluators, because they're evaluators, they can't get a hold of them, or they're not getting the answers they want. We've had people ask us to come out and just put a second set of eyes on someone else's inspection. And we've had people do that for us, so when we do an inspection, they'd have someone else put a second, that doesn't hurt. You know, if you have questions or you're not comfortable with the person that you're having there, and you don't know a lot about these, it doesn't, I don't think it upsets anybody to have another person look at it.
You said something about isolation distances on your map. Can you talk about FHA more recently, or do you want me to talk about that?
You can, or I can, but FHA has changed, for years. In 2000, they wrote out a letter from HUD saying they had a isolation requirement of 100 feet between well and septic. But almost everywhere in Michigan, with the exception of Allegan until just recently, had isolations of 50. Allegan would have 75, but they just recently voted to have it like the rest of the state. So everybody's 50 feet, but FHA required 100 feet. And that was very difficult to sell a house in a rural area because of FHA requirements. But they wrote a letter exempting Wisconsin and Michigan and any state that has those limiting factors. But recently we've been running in, they're not accepting that letter anymore. So they might, do they still have 100-foot isolation?
It's 75 feet, and what's happening is that the lender then, if it's less than 75 feet, the lender has to ask for an exemption, and lenders are telling me they're getting it about half of the time, and there's no rhyme or reason to it. So if you have an isolation distance that's less than 75 feet on an FHA mortgage, about 50% of the time you can plan on it being denied. And then they'll have to go a different route, either conventional, RD has not adopted that standard yet that I know of, but RD does tend to follow FHA a lot of times. So, so far so good, but how long that'll last, we'll see.
And sometimes those exemptions are based on information from the evaluator or from the local agency. They often will ask me to write them a letter saying that isolation distance is okay, and I have no authority to bend what the sanitary code is in each county or district. So I tell them that I can't do that, and then I'll tell them that they can try and contact the health department, but the health department usually will not write them a letter saying if it's 48 feet or if it's 60 feet, they're not gonna write an exemption saying it's okay. They're just gonna say that our isolation is this and it meets our isolation, but they're not gonna say that it's okay that it's less than theirs, because they might have a totally different reason why they stuck in 75 feet, or they used to be 100, that was ridiculous.
Another thing with like FHA and other government loans, check to make sure what samples they're requesting. Sometimes the underwriter will ask for lead, and other times they won't. When you add a lead to an inspection, it's a lot cheaper than finding out later that you need it, sending somebody back out to take the sample, because they're gonna charge a service call just to go out to the property the second time. Not just us, just any evaluation company or health department, whichever you would choose to use. But the other thing is lead does take a little bit longer to get results for, so if you are in a pinch for time, it can hold things up. Kent County Laboratory does do lead samples, but they take anywhere from 10 to 14 days to result them out. It doesn't take that long to actually to get that result, but they run those in batches because they're not a high priority sample. So they wait till they have 3 to 7 samples before they will run those samples. So that's why it's there's a potential you could get it less than 10, but they tell you 10 to 14 days to expect that.
Question, if we're going out to list a property, what are some of the things that we can look for that we know right up front we're gonna have a problem?
Oh, like visual signs of something.
Visual signs, yep.
It helps if you have an idea, well, most likely you're gonna know if I'm well and septic before you go out there. Sometimes if you're in a neighborhood, you might think that it's on well, or maybe it's on septic, but it has a well, or things like that, but if you know that there's any of the facilities that would have to be inspected, like looking at a well, if you know where the well is, and, I mean, damaged is one thing you look for. So I mean, if you just look and you see the well is actually broken, or the cap is off or missing, or anything like that, you don't have to be a well person or an inspector to know that if it's broken. But first you have to know what a well is, so if you have never seen a well, that's not gonna help you much until you start actually doing a couple of these. If you do a couple of these and you see a well that has questions, oftentimes I'll just tell someone if they wanna take a picture and send it to me, if they want like a heads up before they even, order an inspection, they can just text me a picture and I can say, yeah, that looks fine, or, oh, yeah, that's not good, or that's not even a well, so.
Wells
why'd
can be
you
in
send me
lots of
that?
different, they can be in lots of different locations though, and a lot of times homeowners will disguise them, like under those little like decorative fake rocks, or just in landscaping.
Yeah, that's oftentimes, other houses in the front yard where all the landscaping is, it's probably hidden in that. Or if you see one of those plastic rocks, that's probably under that, I mean,
What
things
if
like
it's
that.
just in a hole or a well pit?
Yeah, in a hole or a well pit, there's probably a lot of things that could go wrong there. If you see water in it, or the lid is missing, or it looks dangerous, cause if there's an open hole and there's no top on it, that's a hazard. But if you look inside and there's water in it, that's a problem.
Smaller diameter wells are
Yeah,
not
if they're in a pit.
desired.
Yeah, there's a lot of small diameter wells that people think have to be replaced, and that's not necessarily true. There's a lot of small diameter wells that are okay, but oftentimes when you do find one in a pit, there potentially could be more issues.
And if you can't find one at all, but
Yeah, I
it's
had
served
one
by a well?
yesterday, I'm struggling with right now. Yeah, cause a lot of times what happens is the water line will go out the foundation, or, like the crawl space or the basement, and then it'll go out to where the water line goes, and there's no well out there, cause the wells are supposed to be above ground nowadays. And if they're not above ground, they're in a well house, or they're in a well pit. But sometimes you go out there and there's nothing out there because they're buried. And finding those is very difficult, and a lot of times I can't. And one difference now, that under toast, they would just fail it. I say you either need a new well, or you need it uncovered, located, and you need it measured to know what the well depth is. They're not involved with it anymore. So we'll take water samples and we'll identify that there's a buried well and it wasn't inspected. And if that can go through, that's fine, but one of the priorities on the sheet is UDs, undetermined, and it's because I couldn't find it. And then if it has to be inspected and located by whoever's requiring the inspection, you may have to hire somebody to locate those.
Well drillers can sometimes find them.
Yeah, sometimes they can, and sometimes they get skunked too. Septic tanks are the same thing. Sometimes I don't have records from the health department. That's the first thing we ever do, is if anyone ever asks us to do an inspection, first thing we do is request records. And every county is different, and every county takes a different amount of time, so sometimes it's good for you to do it if you know you're gonna have a listing, but it's not gonna be right away, but you know when it goes, you're gonna go fast. It would be good if you just requested records from the get-go, and then you could just say, hey, I have records, and I don't have to wait a week, right? And then we could probably get you in a day or two.
You can also call, if you do plan to use us for an inspection, you can just give us a heads up, either phone call, text, email, let me know that you have a listing coming up, or you think it's gonna sell pretty fast, and you want me to get the records.
There's a bunch of different ways you can get a hold of Lori to either schedule something, or answer questions. Because she's got 2 different phone numbers, text message, emails, voicemail. So there's a lot of different ways you can get a hold of her.
A lot of the counties have they all have a different process for requesting records, so it kinda just depends what area. Some require a form that is a PDF form that you can fill out online. Some of them you have to actually go in, you either ask for a form or they can email it to you. Some counties have it just on their website where you can fill in the appropriate fields. Some of them do have a fee associated with it. So the only thing that I would ask is that if you do ask us to do an inspection and there is a fee associated with me requesting records and you end up not needing the inspection, or you hire somebody else, that you're not mad that I send you a little bill. So, just cause I don't wanna be paying for FOIA requests if we're not actually doing that job. But I have no
It's
problem
$8,
requesting it.
guys, settle down.
Well, it depends on what county, yeah, but that's it, it's usually not more than that, it's sometimes even less than that.
It's been handy on new listings to go ahead and have you request the records and then put that in the MLS. The county health records is one of the documents that a buyer then, or buyer's agent actually can bring up in terms of, like, you know, a lot of times I'll get a call on a listing, where is the septic?
Right.
Because the buyer wants to do something, whether it's build a pole barn or put an extra driveway in. And it's, I mean, I just have more recently gotten in the habit of calling Lori and saying, would you get those records, and then adding it to the listing itself.
Well, sometimes you can find revealing things in the records too, that, specifically one that was 7 feet down.
Yeah.
You know, so that, something like that, Joel can't dig with a shovel, so that would be
Well, I
something.
can't even locate it, cause I have a probe that, my longest probe is 42 inches. So when I'm all over the yard probing all over the place and I can't find it, I'm like, I don't know what it is, and then when the excavator comes out, they're like, yeah, it was 7 feet to the top, and I'm like, yeah, I don't have a probe that long.
So that would be something that you would have to do to prepare for the inspection, but I would say 98% of the time, you
I'm
don't
pretty
have to
good.
do really anything for us to, you don't have to prepare anything for us to do the inspection, as long as your inspector has access inside, to look at some of the plumbing components, take a water sample is preferred from the kitchen sink.
The health department records usually are helpful, sometimes they're not at all. Sometimes they even lead you in the complete opposite direction. But most of the time when you get records, it will at least give you an idea of what you're looking for and where it should be. So then I have tools that can narrow it down more. And their drawings are rarely as detailed as mine.
When, looking at this part of the septic inspection, I would, if I were to highlight some of the important parts, because some of it doesn't necessarily make a huge difference to the homeowner, but some of the things, would be the saturation level, and the size of the septic tank. The size of the septic tank is kind of help you determine how often you're gonna be pumping, because some septic tanks can be small. By small, that would be in the 5 to 750 range. A lot of homes are serviced by 2 septic tanks, so if they're 2 smaller ones, not as big of a deal. But if you've got one 500-gallon tank, you're gonna have to maintain that tank a lot sooner than you would a 1,000-gallon tank.
Can you explain what actual septic system is and how they're designed, like, kind of the depth of the tank is, what the drain field is?
Yeah,
why we've
basically,
got 2 tanks?
most systems, most standard systems are going to have either a septic tank or multiple septic tanks, and then they're gonna have a final disposal. Final disposal can be a drain field, a drain bed, a dry well, a block trench, cesspool. There's a million different kinds of setups that they are. But basically what it is, you can have an area where the water is drained into the soil, dispersed into the soil. When you're on lots that aren't necessarily conducive for a septic system, they may have a septic tank and a pump chamber, an elevated drain bed. So if there's a pump in there, there's usually a riser, and then there's an electric pole out there. So you would have a septic tank or 2 and then a pump chamber. And then the pump chambers vary on whether they have high water alarms or not. Some have risers, some don't have risers. But basically what you have is you have a septic, which is going to hold the solids back, and then you have a final disposal that disperses the liquid. And there's a lot of different ways of doing that. A trench system or a drain field is gonna be 3-foot wide trenches, and there's gonna be multiples. A drain bed is the whole area, is stone, and then they lay perforated pipe with the holes in it. They have that in there, and that's buried underground. And then an elevated drain bed's the same as a drain bed that's in, but it's filled up on sand, and then they pump up to it. But then there's engineered systems, where they actually treat the systems, or lagoon systems. There's a lot of different kinds of systems. Not everybody is versed in all the different kinds of systems. occasionally when you run across one that's engineered, there's probably engineered plans in the health department records, and it's probably best to have the engineer take a look at it. Most of those engineered systems are gonna have a maintenance report, so every year they should have been getting it inspected. And if you have it inspected every year and they have record that it was inspected, you probably don't have to have it inspected for your sale. You just have to pull up the old inspection report at the sale. But you probably still need to
know
look.
that when you get the.
Yeah, when we apply for records, we would know, if it was an engineered system, or if it was an unusual system that couldn't be inspected by someone like me. Sometimes people will ask us to do a septic inspection because they see there's a riser in the yard, but it's actually on a municipal supply, and it's a lift station that lifts to the municipal system. So most people that have municipal sewer, it's just gravity out to the road and it goes somewhere and it just goes away, so nobody really knows and they don't have anything to inspect. But if there's a tank out there, they might think that that has to be inspected, but that should be maintained by the municipality. Not even the homeowner is usually responsible for the maintenance of the tank in there.
Can you explain what a baffle is? in a
Yeah,
tank? 'Cause
baffle
that's-
is the most critical part of an entire septic system, and alls it is either a elbow or a T, so the pipe. So if this is the tank and it goes down like this, you'll have, the water will be all the way at the top of it, and the pipe that leads out that drains to the final disposal is at the top of the tank. So when someone says they pumped it and it, why is it full already? It's designed to be full, it operates at full level. So you have solids that'll sink, solids that'll float, and the baffle is either a pipe that goes down halfway into the clear zone, and it's either an elbow or a T, or sometimes it's a cement wall. And that keeps all the solids in the tank, and then the clear zone goes up and out that way. And that's, without the baffle, the system won't work properly. And a lot of times when you have a concrete baffle, the concrete baffle gets corroded and pitted and dissolves. I've had people think that when you have well water, you have high minerals like calcium and lime and rust, so you battle that in your sinks and your toilets with like CLR and lime away. Well, that goes into your tank and sits in there for years, and your tank is made out of calcium and lime. So it dissolves and pits it, and sometimes it can corrode and actually cause it to cave in or fall. But the concrete baffle, if there's a concrete baffle in there, sometimes it'll dissolve right at the water line, and then all the solids that are floating will go right out into the drain bed and flood the drain bed. So a baffle inspection, that's one of the things we do. When you hire the health department, they'll usually say it either has to be open for them to inspect because they won't uncover them or locate them, or it has to have a pump card from the last 3 years. That's fine, but sometimes if there's some pitting and corrosion and nobody said anything at the last pumping, because most pumpers will open it from the opposite end of where the baffle is, and they don't ever get a good look at the baffle. I open up the end at the end where the baffle is. And without knowing the condition of the baffle, that's probably the most important part of the whole inspection.
With the, when they come out and they pump the system, typically, they don't, just for our, if I hire Kohler Septic, they're just gonna come out and pump it, they're actually not going to inspect it typically.
It depends, they're starting to change a little bit with that
Well,
because,
they will inspect the tank itself, but I've talked to a lot of pumpers that they don't really want anything to do with the drain field.
yeah,
just
but they
because
will
they don't
inspect,
know
but that's a big
about
thing though, is if you ask them for a pump card, most pumpers know what a pump card is. I do have one that keeps saying, what's a pump card? It's like, they've been in service for 30 years, and I know they know what a pump card is. But they just say that because they don't wanna fill one out. Some pumpers recently have been charging for pump cards. It used to be just something they fill out, instead of a receipt, they fill a pump card. And what the pump card has on there, well, on this one, some of them have more information than this one, but Meyrink or however you say that,
It's gonna be this.
they usually write up a nice site plan too. He doesn't for me because he knows I do a good site plan, so he didn't do one for him. But if you were to hire him, he would probably do a really nice site plan showing where everything is. If he didn't put in the system, it'll just be the tanks. And most pumpers are just gonna service the tanks. But you can tell a lot about the condition of the septic system by looking at the tank. So you look at the water level, and there's a pipe about this big at the top of the tank, and the water level should be right at the bottom of that pipe. So when you open up the tank, the water level's right here, it's working okay. If the water level's low, it's an indication, it's a possible indication that the tank is not watertight, or there's another outlet, or it's draining somewhere else. If the water level is high, that could indicate that it's either not level going out, or it's not dropping to the system, or there's roots or some blockage, or the system is in a state of failure. So looking at the tank alone is actually a really big part. And if the water level is high and then you look at the stone and the stone is clean and dry, most likely there's a damaged pipe or there's a blockage somewhere. A lot of times it's roots, so roots will get in there and just plug up the line.
Well, that brings up pump first, inspect first.
Well, you can pump first, but.
But then the company usually, like I had quite a few issues this year. And so that company would say, it's showing signs of failure, but then the people that did inspection would go into further
I normally
detail.
prefer to do the inspection before the pumping,
Oh,
because
really?
I can actually see the operating level. So
Okay.
I can see where the water level is, not just staining, because staining can be from old water lines too. So if someone pumps it and I see black all the way to the top, it doesn't mean the black was all the way to the top when they pumped it. It could have been like that once before because maybe a diaper got shoved in there and it didn't, and it just couldn't get through, and then it would back up and cause the staining. So I prefer to see it.
Do you come
Before.
twice then, or do you meet them out there?
Neither. No, I go out there and I uncover it and I look at it.
Oh,
And then I
okay.
say whether it needs to be pumped or not. If it does, I leave it open and then nobody gets charged to uncover
I
it.
try to ask
Okay.
when I'm scheduling if you know that you have to have it inspected
Pumped or
or
not,
have
yeah.
it pumped, because normally Joel's protocol is if he opens it up and it doesn't need to be pumped, they'll cover it back up. Because a lot of times if he leaves it uncovered, the homeowner is not happy about that, because Joel doesn't return or like to return to cover
I
the
have.
their septic tanks up. But with the new purchase agreement, I like to make sure we know what we're doing.
The purchase agreement's really screwed up what I do because a lot of people will say it has to be pumped
Right.
whether it's needed or not.
Yeah,
So if I look and it doesn't, the way I would do it in Berry and Eaton County, when they have the time of sale ordinance, I'd open it up. If it didn't need it, I would say that it doesn't need to be pumped and I'd cover it because most people wouldn't pump it. Now, because of the way the purchase agreement is, it doesn't really take into consideration what I see. They don't care what I see because it's written in there. And we actually wrote a letter to them trying to have them take that into consideration when
The
they're.
Forms committee did not
Yeah,
want
the
it
Forms
to
Committee
give me-
said thanks, but we want it that way, so.
How does a homeowner know if their septic system is bad or needs to be pumped without
Usually,
going out and opening the septic?
Opening it's the best way, but most people don't know there's a problem until it's actually backing up or bubbling on the ground.
And by then it's usually too late.
Or they're mowing and their tractor sinks into a wet spot. And you're like,
Yeah, if you got a wet spot.
You have
it's
sludge
bad.
everywhere.
yeah, and that's not a good time to
Sugar's
know.
full.
It would be better if people did look at them or pump them. Part of the reason why, like health departments and pumpers encourage it every 3 to 4 years is because that's probably soon enough that you would probably be able to beat a problem. So if there was something going on, you could probably get ahead of it. And back when it was $70 to pump, everybody did it. Now that it's like 250 or more, I think it's 275 now, even in Berry County.
275 to 3, yeah.
Yeah, so when you're looking at that cost, do you wanna do that